Hello, welcome back to my channel and Merry Christmas. And welcome to my 3 monthly update on the best films I've been watching recently. All discoveries, all films I've seen for the first time. And we're going to kick off with some classics. Yeah, I've watched loads of movies in my life, but there's still some real classic movies out there that I never got round to watching. Case in point, Casque d'Or by Jacques Becker, which has recently come out on a lovely 4K Ultra HD package. Now, this is one of those movies that, back in the old days of film criticism, often get voted as one of the best films ever made, and now hardly anyone watches or even touches. And I kind of wasn't interested in it, to be honest, but I saw it had come out on 4K. I've got a new 4K player and I wanted to test it out, so I bought it. And I watched it and it blew my mind. Such a beautiful piece of work. From the moment that this wonderful riverside shot of this party of people coming up to the riverside in a boat, from the moment right through to the end, an ugly execution scene of a man in a grim prison yard, from that beautiful riverside to that prison yard, an absolutely perfect film that never puts a foot wrong. Becker was of the sort of Jean Renoir school. His film is very Renoirian, both Auguste Renoir and Jean Renoir. It's full of, the robustiousness of life. About, you feel the people, you get to know them, you can almost smell them and feel the rawness of their life. It's a very busy film, lots of camera movements and lots of feeling of being inside, the society, the crowd of people. There's a gorgeous scene right at the beginning, a brilliant piece of filmmaking where you're in this kind of country dance. And the main character is a guy who's just got out of prison, right? And he comes to this country dance, and there's Simone Signoret, absolutely brilliant performance. And she's dancing with this guy, but she only has eyes for him. And the camera moves to all these crowd of people. It's beautifully shot. And she is twirling in a sort of waltz with her partner. And every time she comes back to a certain point, she stares at him, right at us in the camera. The head keeps whipping back, whipping back, whipping back. It's a brilliant piece of filmmaking. And the whole film has that kind of incredible confidence. It's a very simple, basic story, right? This guy gets out of prison, tries to make good, but he falls in love with a local lady who's a gangster's moll, the sort of little small town crooks, and it eventually gets the better of him. One of the things I like about this film, it's not just that sort of Renoir robustiousness of life, which I've come to like as I've got older, and I've come to appreciate more as I've got older. But also because, and I'm going to sound a bit wanky and a bit pretentious here, one of the things I loved about this film, it's got a kind of existential purity. You weren't expecting that, were you? But it has. You see, what happens in the film, this central character is very, very simple and direct, and he does everything out of pure emotional stimulus. There's no sort of psychological baggage. So he sees Simone Signoret, he falls in love with her. Right? Then he has a fight with a guy, a brilliantly staged fight, brilliantly choreographed and shot fight in this lonely pub yard at night. He has a fight with this guy simply because they've got a beef with each other, and he kills him. Then, right at the end, he has to take revenge against the leading hoodlum of the village, and he just goes to shoot him. There's no sort of barrier, the barriers that you expect in respectful art of explanation or context or deep psychological motives. There's almost sort of an existential imperative. I love her, therefore I must do this. I hate him, therefore I must do this. And that's one of the things I found about quite fascinating, this sort of counterpoint of this existential impetus against all this sort of robustiousness and likability of all the characters. Even the main hoodlum is quite likeable. It's a very old-fashioned film. It kind of predates the Nouvelle Vague. It's an older, lost French cinema. But I'd highly recommend it. It's well worth getting hold of. Another classic that I came across from about a similar time, sort of early 50s, is Calle Mayor, which is a Spanish film made by Juan Antonio Bardem, made during the Franco era. Now, I studied Spanish at university, and I watched a lot of Spanish films, but for some reason I didn't get round to Bardem. He's a major Spanish filmmaker, but I just didn't want to watch films from the Franco era, at the time of the terribly boring, repressive, very conservative atmosphere of Franco Spain. But I got round to watching this recently, and you know what? It's a cracking piece of filmmaking. It's got all the virtues of, that classic era of European filmmaking. The story is, There's this guy, he's come from Madrid and he's come to work and live in what is supposed to be a boring provincial town. Though, from an English perspective, it's a gorgeous provincial town. I'd love to live there. But anyway, it's supposed to be boring, right? And he gets involved with the local guys who live there, who are all, they're sort of in their mid-30s, but they're not going anywhere. They lead boring lives. And so to cheer themselves up, they're like a bunch of kids. They play tricks on people, they play pranks. And there's a spinster in the town. You know, in those days, people were very cruel. You know, once a woman got to a certain age and she wasn't married, they called her an old maid or a spinster. And in this film, she's rather improbably played by Betsy Blair, being dubbed. She was the wife of Gene Kelly. She's supposed to be a sort of plain-looking spinster. It doesn't quite work, but anyway, go with it. And what they decide to do is they ask this guy from Madrid, go on, make a play for her, you know, propose to her, and then at the local ball, we'll reveal it was all a trick, and we'll all laugh at her. Very cruel. It's a very cruel film. But what it's doing is exposing that sort of petty cruelty that breeds in a society that is repressed, in a society that has no forward motion. And it's a brilliant, brilliant analysis of small town mentality and cruelty. And it, by the way, is quite a clever sort of satirical poke at Franco Spain without being direct. You know, Bardem is very clever in the way he sneaks in the message about it. I thought it was a superb film. Calle Mayor. That's what it's called. I like saying it. In English, it's just Main Street. A bit boring, isn't it? There we are. The third classic I want to talk about, I owe to you guys, my subscribers. Many of you said I should watch it, and I hadn't got round to it. And I thought, well, everyone's recommending it to me, so I'll try it. And that is The Best Years of Our Lives by William Wyler. This was made in 1946. It was just after the war. And it's a film about returning GIs, veterans, coming back to America after the war and having to fit into peacetime life and finding it very difficult. Three men going back to this same town. I've always loved British wartime propaganda. I was never so keen on the American variant, which I found a bit tougher and rawer and not so moving somehow, not so human. But this is a post-war film, trying to look at things from the GI perspective. And it's a very interesting movie. It's a very intelligent movie. It's very well acted, brilliant performances by Dana Andrews, Frederick March, and Harold Russell, just looked it up, who plays this... He was an actual genuine GI who had lost his hands in the war and he had hook replacements, and he plays the sort of third character. And what is interesting about this film is it's not just the intelligence of the writing and the intelligence of the acting. I found it fascinating in its examination of class, which not many American films do. So that you see these three guys, you get to know these three guys on board this plane. And Dana Andrews seems very urbane and sophisticated, but he goes back to the poorest house. He's really from the wrong side of the tracks. He's from Skid Row. And then the guy with the hooks comes from a suburban, you know, sort of lower middle class environment. And then Frederick March's character is actually a wealthy banker. So it subverts all your expectations. And that's kind of one of the things I found quite interesting about the film. Did I really buy into Dana Andrews as a lower class guy made good? I'm not sure, but it was an interesting development. What the film reminded me of more than anything was Charles Dickens. And it has all of Dickens's plus points and negative points. So the sort of the examination of modern society and how all these people fit into it, very Dickensian, is beautifully done. And the behaviour of the three men is not predictable. But it also has the weaknesses of Dickens. You know, like in Dickens, you know, you're reading this fantastic book, and then you have the sort of the girl character, you know, the sort of the waif character, the poor little girl who Dickens sentimentalises to death. That kind of happens in The Best Years of Our Lives right at the end, where the guy with the hooks, there's a girl next door, you know, the proverbial girl next door that he wants to marry, but he's feeling bad about himself, and she declares undying love to him, whatever. That bit is a bit sentimental, and it threatens to undermine the film at the end. But there's so much that's good in this film that I wouldn't reject it just for that reason. I think it's an extraordinary movie, and for Dana Andrews, and particularly Frederick March, actually. And I think the Frederick March part of the story is the one that's lasted the best for the modern viewer, actually. I think he is particularly good. Right, let's turn to some modern movies, because one of the great things about the past few months is I've actually discovered lots of new movies, sort of, in the last couple of years, that are actually really good. I thought I'd gone off modern cinema, but I've seen so many films recently that I think I really value. Number one is Eureka. This is available on streaming. This is the latest film by the Argentine director Lisandro Alonso, and I'm going to make a big claim here. I think it's the single best film I've seen in the last 7 years. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. I was amazed, absolutely stunned, that I found it available on my mum's Sky Cinema package. I couldn't believe it. Just rented it for about £5. Incredible. This is an extraordinary film. The best way of describing it is it's an anti-Western. You know how many of the great Westerns are about the origins of the West, how America was built. This is an anti-Western. It's about the desecration of the Native American peoples and their loss of hope. And it's told on a similarly epic scale, but it's done as an art house film, very, avant-garde art house film. Now, I don't want to spoil this too much, so go away and watch it before you listen to this review, but the way it's done is, it starts out as a Western, in black and white with Viggo Mortensen, as this guy who walks into a Western town to get revenge, and it's very bloody and it's very violent. And then suddenly, it switches, and suddenly we're in a modern part, I think it's in Dakota, it's in a reservation of Native American peoples, and we're following this female cop on her journey at her night shift, going around all these various places. And we see the terrible hopelessness and despair, the drinking, the drugs, the gambling in this reservation. It's all very much slow cinema, right? And it's filmed with a simple clarity and beauty that is quite surprising. And then this story will morph into a more mythical tale, which seems to take us back to the jungles of South America and the exploitation of Native American peoples by big white corporations type thing, gold hunting. It's set in the modern day, but it also takes us right back to the beginnings. It's an incredibly ambitious film. It also, just incidentally, has a fantastic special effect in it, which I genuinely could accept as not a special effect. It involves a big bird. If those of you who've seen it will know what I'm talking about. Really impressive. I thought this film was absolutely incredible. I'd sort of lost hope that modern cinema could be so epic and ambitious. Those of you who've seen the films of Lav Diaz from the Philippines, there's a heroic filmmaker who still believes that cinema can sum up the universe, This is an incredible film. The ambition of it blew my mind. It's so beautiful and it's so powerful. You really feel in the mise-en-scène and the lighting, the despair of this entire people across an entire continent. I might make it sound a very forbidding film. It's not. It's weirdly beautiful and fascinating. It has humour, it has myth, it has special effects. It's incredible. I thought it was absolutely amazing, and I'd recommend it to anyone. The next film I want to talk about is this little one, No Bears. Now, I understand this is available on Criterion in the US, but it doesn't seem to have got much publicity, this film. I cannot understand it. This film, to me, is an outright masterpiece. You could argue that just in the last few moments, it descends into a little bit of melodrama, but I can forgive it because the rest of the film is so beautifully balanced and poised. It was made by Jafar Panahi. I talked about him in my previous video. Panahi is an Iranian director, right? And in the late 90s, 2000s, he was by far and away one of the most promising and interesting filmmakers working. But then the Iranian authorities got hold of him. They didn't like him. They put him under house arrest, and they banned him from filmmaking for something ridiculous like 25 years. And ever since then, Panahi has been finding ways round this sentence to make movies. I think he's now no longer under house arrest, but he shouldn't be making films, but he still gets these films smuggled out. I believe the first one he did, This Is Not a Film, he smuggled out on a USB stick in a cake. That might be an apocryphal story, but I believe it. Now, this film is his latest version of this, trying to beat the Iranian authorities at their own game. And I just think it's an incredible film. So, like a lot of Iranian film, it works on different levels. So, in the film, Panahi is kind of playing himself. He's come to a remote Iranian village on the border with Turkey, well, sort of around that area, right? And he sent his film crew remotely into Turkey to film a story about people smuggling people into Europe, right? Using people who have gone through this process or are interested in this process. But because he can't leave Iran, they won't let him go across the border, he has to stay in this remote village. And so the film starts operating on all sorts of levels. So we're in Turkey, we're playing out the film, but we're also seeing the travails of the film crew making that film. Then we go back to Panahi and we see that he starts to have problems with the local community because A, they want something from him because he's a celebrity, but B, his presence is causing them problems with the authorities. And so the whole film starts this game, which is common in Iranian cinema, of different plots unravelling in sort of parallax composition to each other, while at the same time there's different layers of fact and fiction, playing out, for example, this idea of a people smuggling gang with actors who have got some, experience of that in real life. It's an extraordinarily ambitious film. I mean, an ambition that is far greater than most films out there at the moment, yet it's not that celebrated. I can't recommend it highly enough. And also, it's got a great title, No Bears. What a great title, come on. Now, while we're talking about modern movies, you know what I'm going to say, don't you? I can't leave this guy alone, Hong Sang-soo. You know he's my favourite director, I've said it a billion times. So I'll just mention the latest one I've caught up with. It's called A Traveller's Needs, and it's his third film starring Isabelle Huppert. Now, all three of the films, Isabelle Huppert, the famous French actress, all three of these films he's made with Isabelle Huppert are kind of jeu d'esprit. They're not perhaps his most trenchant work. The first one was called In Another Country, and it's perhaps Hong's most overtly comic film. It's a bit of fluff, it's a good fun, but it's a bit of fluff by his standards. The second film that they made together was called Claire's Camera, and I think is an underrated gem of a film, actually. I really like that film. It's all set in and around the Cannes Film Festival. Now, this third film is very odd, and Isabelle Huppert is very odd in it. She plays this elderly French woman. She's in Korea, and we don't really know why she's there or how she's got there. And she seems to be starting out as a French teacher, teaching these Korean people French. But she doesn't really seem to know what she's doing. She's trying to devise this new method of teaching French, which her clients are clearly very uncomfortable with. This is an extremely uncomfortable movie, and Hong is really enjoying that discomfort. You know, I've often said this about Hong Sang-soo. One of the things that's so enjoyable about his films is he puts his actors in discomfort with each other. Instead of trying to find chemistry, he likes leaving them in suspension and watching what they do in a really uncomfortable scenario. So if you don't like that, don't watch this film. I love it. I love it so much. Anyway, so the film has 3 acts. And the first act, you see Isabelle Huppert is trying to teach this young Korean woman French, and it's not going terribly well. Then you go to another scenario where she's teaching someone else French, and it's not going terribly well. Then, in the third act of the film, she goes back to her apartment and she's living rather improbably with this young guy. And there's a kind of are they or aren't they kind of thing going on. His mother comes round, more embarrassment. Isabelle Huppert makes herself scarce. The mother tells her son, what you're doing with this older French lady. And it all seems to be unravelling for Isabelle Huppert. What's she doing there? Has she run away from France to be with this young man? What's going on? So the film is rather like a haiku. You know those 3-line Japanese poems where you get a line, and then another line that cuts at a sort of tangent to the others but gives meaning to it. You know, I'm not a poet, you know, like autumn moon, a cricket sings, I'm missing you tonight. Something like that. I know. I'm not a poet, guys, right? But the whole movie is like that. The whole movie is a movie haiku. One scene, a next scene that almost replicates that first scene, and then something that goes off on a real tangent. And I find that fascinating. You know, Hong is still one of the most experimental filmmakers out there, making films that no one else is touching, with the most meagre of means. You know, just a couple of scenes in a hotel room, scene in a park, that's it. Nothing spectacular. And yet, it's resonated with me for days afterwards. For Hong fans watching, I also finally caught up with last year's In Water. I'm not sure about that one. I struggled with it, partly because Hong took the rather strange decision to shoot the whole thing out of focus. There's only about 2 scenes in focus. Now, I'm getting on a bit here. You know, I'm 53 next year, and my eyes can't take that. I got really tired eyes. I kept falling asleep. So I'm not sure about that movie, but a lot of people feel very highly about it. I think it's a very good film. Hong, still the best director currently working. But now, my friends, let's surf out into the deep waters, the far distant ocean of extreme cinema. Who's got the strength to come with me? The cinema that sorts out the men from the boys, the women from the girls. Let's go down to the 100% vodka of extreme filmmaking. Let's talk about Malmkrog by Cristi Puiu. This is by the Romanian director Cristi Puiu, a brilliant director. Arguably, I think one of the best directors currently working, but often ignored because his films are quite tough. This is a 3-hour, 20-minute film based on a series of philosophical dialogues. It basically is 5 Russian aristocrats round the turn of the 1900s into the turn of the 20th century in a sort of winter house in Transylvania. And it's an adaptation of these dialogues. So these 5 characters, inhabited by actors, just speak these dialogues to each other over 3 hours, 20 minutes, as if they're having some country house party. That's it. I loved it. Absolutely incredible. It requires a hell of a lot of concentration. There's a hell of a lot of subtitles to read. And these are knotty conversations, starting out about war, then moving on to God, then moving on to the nature of humanity, all this sort of stuff. I find it thrilling to watch, and I loved the way that Puiu directs it, so that it's directed by like a sort of living painting, and so much is done through the movement, the choreography of the actors around each other in space. Brilliant use of space, so that often sometimes a speaker is cut off screen and we're only watching those listening. It builds in such unusual ways. There's an incident of violence halfway through that is never explained and is never paid off. Puiu, as well as doing this kind of quite intellectual exercise in, philosophical theology, is also playing games with the audience. I found it absolutely riveting. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's for those of you who want, 100% vodka cinema, no sort of silly, commercial Hollywood nonsense. This is for the real, this is the guys who want to go out in the wilderness, on your own. This is proper, it's sort of cinema. I loved it. Now let's go to Australia. Yes, Australia. We weren't expecting this kind of cinema from Australia, were we? Let me introduce you to a film called The Plains by first-time feature director David Eastill. This film is also 3 hours long. It's 3 hours long, and throughout the entire length of the film, the camera is placed on the back seat of a car, looking past the driver in the passenger seat out of the windscreen. The driver of the car is a guy going home from his job on the outskirts of Melbourne back to his house in the centre. He works for a minor law firm. That's it. Over and over again, we see him get in the car and drive home through the rush hour traffic for 3 hours. Occasionally, he's joined by a young colleague of his who he's giving a lift to. He's actually played by David Eastill himself. And they have a chat, and we get to know these people, particularly the driver. And over the course of these 3 hours, we get involved in both in the routine of this man, but also his wider life and what he thinks. And that's what I love about this film. I love it as a revelation of personality, a revelation of character. We are getting to know someone at that time of someone's life, which is most routine and humdrum. But actually, that's the time when people most actually reveal themselves, When people in a moment of crisis or in a social moment, they put on an act, they move into a sort of, their character. But when people are just going through the rhythm of driving or routine, then we get to know who they really are. And these are just sort of light conversations between two work colleagues. But they reveal so much. Now, I don't want to say too much about how the film was made, because that gives away the trick of it, right? It's not all it seems to be, right? And that might upset some people when they find out the trick of it. I actually thought it made the film greater. But the other thing I like about this film, a quick thing I want to say is, it's so rare to see a modern film which is just about people. It's not trying to make a political or ideological point. It's not trying to grandstand. In fact, the people it's sitting with for 3 hours are very middle-class people. You know, ordinary, fairly well-paid people. You know, and it's not trying to make some kind of gargantuan point about the horrors of the middle class or the bourgeoisie or making money. They're not avatars of a class or an ideological battle point, you know. None of that. It's just two people getting to know each other. And I found that so incredibly liberating and fresh. I absolutely loved it. The Plains, David E. Still. If I could just convert one person in this video to that film, my job is done. Now, porn. Yes, porn. You never know what you're going to get on this channel. It's totally unexpected. Here's me searching the highways and byways of cinema for you so you don't have to. So now we're going to talk about some soft porn. We're going to talk about Love Hotel. Yeah. What a great title for a movie. Now, why am I buying soft porn? Well, I bought this film because it's directed by Shinji Somai. Those of you who've watched this channel for a long time will know I'm slightly obsessed with this director. I think he's one of the secret greatest directors ever. He's a Japanese director. He started working in the 80s, went through the 90s and 2000s, and he's a real cult figure in Japan. Not so well known outside Japan, though he's getting there. People are starting to realise he's a special person. An extraordinary director, I think. And I found out that Third Window Films in the UK had released this film where he returned to his roots when he was a young filmmaker, making pink films. They're called pink films, or Roman porno in Japan. And it's kind of like a semi-respectable genre in Japan. A lot of directors cut their teeth in porn, soft porn, you know. And in the mid-80s, after he'd had 2 or 3 successes, he returned to the genre and he made this film. They've released it on Blu-ray, and I had to watch it. Now, I'll tell you a little anecdote here, right? So I bought this film, and I bought it sight unseen, right? And I keep a list, right, of films that I've bought on DVD or Blu-ray that I haven't got around to watching yet, right? Now, I had a friend come to stay, a female friend come to stay, about 3 weeks ago. And she wanted to have a video evening, pizza and video evening sort of thing. She said, Mike, what should we watch? And she found out that I had this list of films that I hadn't actually seen. So she said, well, let's watch one of those, right? And so I was going through them, and I just said jokingly, oh, I've got this Japanese soft porn film. She said, oh, let's watch that, right? So I was a bit worried, but we put it on. Now, at the start of this film, right, this guy, he hides out a hotel room, calls in this young prostitute, and proceeds to attack her quite brutally, you know, and he forces, get ready for this people, forces a vibrator inside her sort of thing, and you can see it wobbling around between her legs. It's very graphic, it's hardcore, and quite upsetting to watch. And I'm sorry, we're sitting there watching it with my female friend. So my advice is, from your Uncle Mike, don't watch Japanese soft porn films with your female friends. Anyway, so we watched the film. It's a rather awkward experience. But I thought it was quite brilliant. You see, what Shinji Somai does here, right, he does what a lot of great directors do. He takes the skeleton of the genre. So he's like, right, Shinji, you've got to have one, you know, sex scene, lots of boobs, few arse shots, you know, and then you can do whatever you want. And he thinks, right, okay, I'll give you what you want, and then I'll make the film that I want to make around it, right? So what he does is, he very deliberately, he shoves you in at the beginning with this really kind of shocking 5 minutes, where this guy comes back to his office and he sees that the Yakuza have come and they're raping his wife in front of him. Then he attacks this prostitute, and it's a full-on graphic scene. I mean, nothing is left to the imagination, right? And then, boom, the film stops. You move 2 years ahead in time, and it all quietens down to almost like an art movie status. So he punched you in the face. Now he steps back. The guy who attacked the girl is now a taxi driver. You know, he's fallen on hard times, he's making ends meet as a taxi driver. And one night, he sees the woman that he attacked, and he follows her, and eventually he gives her a lift, and he tries to reacquaint himself with her. And this is where Shinji Somai starts to show his genius. None of this is done in the sort of pastel colours of a sort of American soft porn film. It's very harshly realistic. And there's this incredible scene where he picks her up in the taxi, and she asks him to take her to the quayside, to the docks. And it's all done in one shot. The taxi stops by the quayside. She gets out. She moves across the quayside to a point which is covered in a red light. The use of lighting and choreography and movement is exquisite. And you think she's going to kill herself. He jumps in rather embarrassingly to stop her. She says, "What the hell are you doing?" Walks away from him. This has all been done in one take. Then, as he confronts her with the truth of who he is, she very boldly walks past him, sort of shoving him out of the way to show that she's not afraid of him, picks up her shoes, and then runs off. It's all done in one take. If you want to understand how a great director takes very simple material but uses choreography and lighting and the movement of actors and the difference of rhythm to create something that is much more poetic and powerful, that is an object scene in how to do it. I recommend you highly to watch it. Okay, it's a porn film, but it's extraordinary. And then what happens through the film is that this reunion of these two characters, you'd think, she'd hate him, right? But these are two very screwed up people, and they start to look in each other for what they need from their rather deprived lives. It's a harrowing film. It's a very sad, despairing film. And it also turns out to be a brutal kind of questioning of Japanese male society. It's a soft porn film where you're being asked to sort of gloat over this lady's body, but actually the whole film is showing what bastards men are, how hypocritical they are, how horrible they are, how unfeeling they are. And it's weirdly, a deeply feminist film. No other director could have got away with it. No other director could have got away with its fantastic shifts between very sort of almost social realism and very sort of hysterical drama. No one does this quite like Shinji Somai. So there you go. Try out some porn this weekend. Just don't watch it with your female friends. Another quite tough Japanese movie, going back a bit now to the 1980s, is The Sea and Poison. This is by a director called Kai Kumei. He didn't make many films. He made a wonderful film in the 70s called The Long Darkness, simply about a young couple getting married and the difficulties they face in getting married. That's a film I would recommend to anyone. It's an absolute masterpiece. So I checked this out. Now, The Sea and Poison was quite a tough movie, even for the 1980s when it was made. It was based on a Japanese novel that itself was based on real events. It's all set in a hospital in Tokyo during the Second World War. The Americans are bearing down on the Japanese. And in this Japanese hospital, the research unit is carrying out very questionable experiments on people in the name of medical science. Then the army come to this group of doctors and say, "We've got some American air pilots who were downed by Japanese guns. We've got them prisoner. We want you to use them for medical experimentation. We want you to do vivisection on them." Brutal stuff, right? All filmed in this kind of quite cold, sort of almost sepia black and white. It's an extraordinarily tough film, not an easy watch. Kai Kumei does not stint on the detail. There are scenes of operation where you actually see the inside, you see the heart beating, you see the scalpel going in. It's, for me, who is a medical wuss, it was very tough to watch. But I think there are a few films I've seen which are so incredibly determined to uncover the awful hypocrisies of their own society and the awful evil done within that society, and how people get inveigled into that. It's a genuinely shocking and harrowing film, and it's a brilliant examination of medical ethics. It's a brilliant examination of ethics in wartime, and the individual's relationship to society, how the individual's moral culpability is related to society's moral culpability. It's not an easy watch, not a pleasant watch, but by crikey, it's impressive. And finally, a final film. People who've followed my channel for a long time will know that I'm a great fan of the French director Jacques Rivette, who was a major figure of the Nouvelle Vague. But his final film, 36 Vues de Pic Saint-Loup, or as it's called in Britain, Around a Small Mountain, though I don't know why it's called that, I hadn't found this film. I don't know if it was ever released in the UK, actually. I finally got hold of it and I watched it. And I think it's one of the most beautiful and moving films I've seen this year. And it's so simple, so gossamer-like, it could almost vanish in the wind. It's a film about a travelling circus. That shows you how French it is, doesn't it? I mean, who makes a film about a travelling circus these days? But anyway, right. So it's a travelling circus, and it's a sort of arty circus. And the film is intercut with scenes of arty-type circus acts. And it's run by Jane Birkin and her sister. Jane Birkin has returned to this circus after years away from it for reasons that we find out as the film develops. And she's courted, rather improbably, by this rather flash Italian guy who helps repair her car at the beginning of the film. So it's a kind of romance film set in around this kind of travelling circus which is going around little towns and villages in southern France in the summer. The film plays out like a sort of circus cabaret. Each scene is like an act. And Rivette keeps playing up the artificiality of it and keeps sort of breaking the fourth wall, or the characters just say, oh, this is kind of nonsense or whatever. And yet we still get the strain of beauty and melancholy through the film. There's so many things I like about this film. It's Rivette's love of performance and play acting and make-believe. And this joy of a troupe of people, a bubble from the world, playing games with each other, the way that the film will play games with you. One of the reasons I love this film is I love the way it films Jane Birkin. Here is an older woman, but it films her as if she's, a beautiful film star. It's a film about the beauty of age. I'm a man in my 50s, and it's so rare to see a film where an older person is treated as a beauty, and she's not made up and she's not glamorized, she's not Joan Collins. She's just as she is, with no makeup. And yet she is extraordinarily hauntingly beautiful and strong. And the film is in love with that. It's not trying to, fake glamour her. It's just showing her as she is. And it's a very tortured, quite difficult Jane Birkin that we find in this film. And I like the fact that Rivette respects her. The camera and the director respect her and her integrity and her nature, and that's at the centre of the film. That's one of the things I think is so beautiful about the film. Apparently, I've read that Rivette suffered from Alzheimer's. He was losing his ability to make films, and it started to happen during this film. And all the people in the film rallied round to help him finish it. So it was life mirroring art, the same kind of, that sort of same family feel amongst this cast, these circus troopers, as you find in all of Rivette's films, actually took place in real life as well, which makes the film even more beautiful. It's a very slight film. It's, it almost feels like a piece of amateur theatre, like a bit of Amdram, and that's its charm and that's its beauty. And yet, despite all that sort of amateurishness, there is this sort of, just the dark gleam of a real master at work. And it makes the film, it sort of haunts you days after you've seen it. I absolutely loved it. If you can get hold of it, try it. Don't expect something, epic and mind-blowing. Just take something like a gentle sort of after-dinner drink that lingers. Well, that's it. That's my rundown of films. If I don't speak to you again, have a fantastic Christmas and a wonderful New Year. Thanks very much.